Not all heroes wear capes. Some walk on four tired legs, with eyes that have seen too much and hearts that never gave up. This story doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with a broken dog, a newborn's first breath, and the quiet miracle that unfolded between them. It's about the kind of love that doesn't need words, just presence. If you believe in stories that heal, that stay, that change us in small, forever ways, please like this video, subscribe, and stay with us. What you're about to hear is not just about a dog. It's about what it means to be family. The wind slipped through the tall pines of Cedarville Ridge like a forgotten hymn, low and mournful. Snow had fallen the night before, thick and unrelenting, blanketing every trail, every rooftop, every broken fence in a hushed, frozen stillness. The town, nestled quietly in the Colorado Rockies, seemed caught between breath and silence. Zachary Dawson moved through the snow with steady but heavy steps, his boots crunching with each forward push. The cold bit at his cheeks and tugged at the frayed edges of his old flannel coat. But he didn't flinch. The cold was familiar, predictable. It didn't sneak up on you like grief did. It didn't wake you at 3 a.m. like the dreams still did sometimes. Dreams of sand, of heat, of gunmetal, and breath held too long. Zach was 38, with the kind of face that bore the weight of battles both seen and unseen. Tall and broad-shouldered, his military frame had softened just slightly over the years, though his posture still held the rigid discipline of old habits. His dark brown beard was flecked with gray, and his eyes steel blue, thoughtful, carried a tiredness that no sleep could shake off. He had come to Cedarville 3 years ago to start over, to build something quieter, gentler, something resembling peace. That morning, a call had come through from an elderly woman named Doris, who lived near the edge of town. She had heard barking in the woods. Not wild barking, she insisted. It sounded desperate, like someone lost. Zach hadn't expected much, maybe a stray, maybe nothing, but something about her voice stayed with him. He reached the ravine just beyond the tree line, where the wind seemed to hesitate, as if holding its breath. Then he saw it, a shadow in the snow, barely more than a ripple against the whiteness. He knelt, heart tightening. There, half buried in drift and ice, was a dog, a German shepherd, large and still, its fur tangled and stiff with frost. One ear twitched as Zach approached, and a single golden eye blinked open. No growl, no bark. Just a look, steady, hollow, and so terribly human. Zach crouched beside the animal, speaking softly. "Hey, you still with me?" The dog didn't move, but it didn't retreat either. Zach saw the wound then, a deep gash along its left shoulder, the blood long dried into its thick coat. The dog was shaking, ribs pronounced, breath ragged. Yet there was something unbroken in those eyes, something that said, "I haven't given up. Not yet." He removed his outer coat and gently wrapped it around the dog. The warmth of the body beneath startled him. It was still alive. Barely. "You picked one hell of a place to fall apart," he muttered, then lifted the heavy body in his arms, careful not to jostle the wound. The dog whimpered softly but didn't resist. The walk back was long. The snow slowed him. The wind pushed against him, but Zach kept going, past the iced-over stream, through the bending pines, across the clearing where deer tracks vanished into white. The Dawson cabin came into view, its chimney trailing smoke into the iron sky. Warm light spilled from the front window home. Inside, Olivia was moving gently around the kitchen, her small hands wrapped around a mug of ginger tea. She was 35, slight and pale, with soft freckles that danced across her cheeks like snowflakes. Her red-brown hair was tied in a loose knot at the base of her neck, and her wool sweater stretched gently over her swollen belly. The baby was due in 6 weeks. Olivia had always had a quiet strength. Before Cedarville, before the miscarriages, before the move into the mountains, she'd been a literature teacher in a Denver high school. Students loved her for her calm wisdom, her open eyes, the way she listened. But grief had changed her. The 2 pregnancies lost had left scars she didn't wear on her skin. But Zach saw them every day in the way she folded her hands over her belly when no one was looking, or how she whispered lullabies into empty rooms. When the door slammed open, the cold rushing in behind Zach, Olivia turned sharply, her eyes widened. "Zach, what?" He stepped in quickly, snow falling from his boots, coat cradling a bundle of matted fur and trembling breath. "I need towels, and the med kit." Her voice dropped to a whisper. Is that a dog? Found him near the ravine. Hurt bad. Think he's XK9. Has the tattoo. Zach laid the dog gently by the fireplace, and Olivia dropped to her knees beside it. The dog's eyes flicked toward her, and something softened in her face. He's so still, she murmured. He's hanging on, Zach replied, already cleaning the wound with gloved hands. But just barely. Together, they worked in silence. Olivia fetched warm water and bandages. Zach stitched carefully, murmuring the whole time, not to her, but to the dog. Comforting, reassuring, as if this stranger already belonged to them. When the worst was over, Olivia laid a soft blanket over the dog's body. His breathing had steadied. His ears twitched in sleep. What should we call him? She asked, glancing at her husband. Zach thought for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of the dog's chest. Bruno. Bruno, Olivia repeated. It suits him. They sat by the fire in silence for a long time, the crackle of wood and wind outside wrapping around them like a lullaby. Then Zach turned to look at her. His eyes lingered, not just on her belly or the tired curve of her shoulders, but on the woman she had become, a woman who had lost twice what most couldn't bear once, and still she carried hope. Still, she smiled at the thought of a name. Then he looked at the dog. Bruno. Battered, scarred, near frozen, but still breathing. Still here. And something stirred in Zach's chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just duty, not just responsibility, but the flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, this little family of 3, soon to be 4 still, had room to heal. I guess, he said quietly, we keep him. Outside, the snow fell steadily, gentle as breath, covering the earth in silence once more. By morning, the snow had stopped falling, leaving behind a pristine world washed in soft light. The sky had cleared to a cold, brittle blue, and icicles hung from the roof of the Dawson cabin like frozen tears. Inside, the scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from the stovetop, where Olivia was gently stirring oatmeal while humming a melody only she seemed to remember. Bruno lay on the rug by the fire, his bandaged legs stretched out awkwardly, his breathing shallow but steady. Overnight, the dog had barely moved, save for a slight twitch of his ears whenever Olivia passed nearby. His eyes remained closed most of the time, though Zach had caught him watching with one eye half-lidded when he thought no one noticed. Zach sat at the small kitchen table, sipping his coffee while glancing at the old military field journal he still kept for no good reason. Pages stained by dust, dried blood, and time. He wasn't writing anything, just staring, thinking. Olivia glanced over her shoulder. He's watching me. Zach didn't look up. He watches everything. There was no malice in his tone, just quiet awe. It was something Zach understood. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was a reader of rooms, a creature who had learned to measure people before approaching. Later that morning, they took Bruno outside for a short, cautious walk. He limped heavily, but his body leaned into Zach's leg as if it had once been trained to heal. The old leash Zach had found in the storage shed barely held up, frayed at the clasp, but Bruno didn't pull or resist. He walked like a soldier who remembered duty but had forgotten purpose. As they neared the edge of the yard, a battered pickup truck rolled into the snowy driveway, tires crunching over the icy gravel. Zach looked up, already knowing who it would be. Tommy Hale stepped out of the driver's side, wearing his signature canvas bib overalls and a Carhartt coat layered over a plaid shirt. At 67, he moved slower these days, with a limp from an old rodeo injury and fingers gnarled from decades of woodworking. His long white beard was tucked into his collar, and his gray eyes squinted against the glare. "Snow didn't bury you yet, huh?" Tommy called out, his voice like gravel and tobacco. Zach smirked faintly. "Still standing?" Tommy's eyes fell on Bruno. He whistled low. "That yours?" "I sort of found each other," Zach said. Tommy crouched stiffly and studied the dog. German shepherd, working line, see the depth in the chest, the shape of the jaw. He's not just any mutt. Bruno looked back at him with quiet stillness. No growl, no wag, just observation. "He's been through hell," Tommy added, "but he still knows how to hold his ground. That's rare." Inside, Olivia served them coffee while Zach explained how he'd found Bruno and the tattoos in the ear. Tommy listened silently, nodding slowly. "You know what I think?" Tommy said after a while. "He's waiting for someone to give him orders again. That kind of dog doesn't just forget. He needs a purpose." Later that evening, Olivia sat near the fireplace with a baby book in her lap, carefully pasting ultrasound photos into the pages. Her hands were small and pale, and they trembled occasionally, not from weakness, but from memory. After their second miscarriage, she had burned the first book, along with the tiny baby shoes she had once bought in hope. This new one, this new beginning, was an act of both courage and quiet defiance. Bruno watched her from his place on the rug. He didn't blink, didn't shift. But when she leaned forward to pick up a photo that had fallen, he stood slowly and limped toward her. Olivia froze. The dog approached with careful steps, head low, tail still, and then, without a sound, he placed his head gently against her belly. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Inside her, the baby kicked, not once, not in protest, but in rhythm. Olivia's eyes welled with tears. She looked down at Bruno, whose eyes were half closed now, purring, not quite like a cat, but a soft vibrating sound deep in his throat. "Zach," she whispered. He came in from the hallway, his expression changing instantly when he saw the scene. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knows there's life here." That night, Olivia left a folded blanket near the nursery door, and Bruno curled up beside it, as if assigned a watch post. He stayed there until dawn. Over the next week, Bruno regained strength steadily. His appetite returned, and his steps became firmer. Zach noticed how the dog would often sit near Olivia without touching her, just watching, ears twitching, as if waiting for signs of discomfort. When she dozed on the couch in the afternoons, Bruno never slept. Zach, meanwhile, found himself listening more closely to the silence of the house, the absence of crying, the presence of breath. He caught himself brushing his fingers over the baby crib that Olivia had decorated with hand-sewn forest animals. He remembered how the last time they'd set up a crib, it had remained empty. One evening, while Olivia napped, Zach stood at the threshold of the nursery, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Bruno padded up beside him. "Think I can do this?" Zach asked aloud, not expecting an answer. Bruno simply sat, gazing into the same room, ears forward. Zach exhaled, the breath leaving him like smoke. It was a small moment, but something shifted. The days began to stretch gently toward spring, though the snow in Cedarville was reluctant to loosen its grip. The morning frost still clung stubbornly to the window panes, and icicles glittered like silent chimes above the porch. Inside the Dawson cabin, warmth returned not just in the fire, but in the spaces between breaths, between glances, between footsteps that now had purpose. Bruno had claimed his place in the household, though he never asked for it. He simply settled, quietly, like a shadow with a heartbeat. When Olivia moved, he followed, but not too close. He was always careful, always aware of the weight she carried. His large paws patted gently behind her, as she moved from the kitchen to the nursery, from the sunroom to the couch. If she sat, he'd settle nearby. If she stood too long, he'd whimper softly, reminding her to rest. It was during one of these quiet evenings, snow still falling in lazy spirals beyond the windows, that it happened. Olivia had curled herself into the far end of the couch, a thick knitted blanket pulled over her legs. A book lay open but forgotten on her lap. The baby had been still all day, content, as if listening to the hush of the storm. Bruno lay on the rug, head resting on his front paws, tail still. The room smelled of chamomile and cedarwood. Without warning, Bruno rose. He walked over to Olivia with deliberate care, ears angled forward, posture low but calm. She looked down, surprised but unafraid. He nudged her hand gently with his nose, then stepped closer and, with a deep sigh, lowered himself until his head rested against the side of her belly. She froze. "Bruno," she whispered, unsure what she was witnessing. And then it happened. A sudden strong kick so firm it made her gasp. Then another, then another. It was the most active the baby had been in weeks. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. And then, as if the tension of months, no, years, suddenly cracked open, she laughed. A clear, bright, breathless laugh. The kind she hadn't made in a long time. Zach walked in just in time to see it. Olivia laughing, tears clinging to her lashes. Bruno's eyes half closed in calm focus. her hand stroking behind his ears, the baby kicking in joyful rhythm beneath it all. He didn't speak, just stood still, letting the moment wrap around him like a blanket freshly pulled from the dryer. That night, Zach began documenting what he called the Bruno patterns. He had never been much of a journaler, but his field notes training kicked in: columns, times, behavior, reactions. He wrote it all down in a notebook left over from his time in the military. The same one that had once held maps and enemy positions now held scribbles about tail wags and fetal kicks. He called Dr. Larson the next day, a semi-retired veterinarian who had treated farm dogs in the area for 30 years. Dr. Larson lived just beyond the frozen bend of Miller's Creek in a ranch-style home that smelled faintly of hay and peppermint. He was a stocky man in his 70s with a broad face, thick glasses, and a perpetual sunburn on his neck no matter the season. He believed more in instinct than textbooks, but his hands, though calloused, were steady and kind. Zach showed him videos he had taken on his phone. Bruno approaching Olivia's belly, the way the baby responded with kicks, the calmness that came after, the purring-like hum Bruno made. Dr. Larson whistled through his teeth. I've seen dogs loyal enough to wait at their owner's grave. I've seen others predict seizures and find cancer lumps. But this? He rubbed his chin, impressed. This ain't training. This is intuition. He's not just guarding her, he's communicating. Zach nodded, quietly proud and quietly confused. But why her? Why the baby? Because, the old vet said, closing the notebook gently, he lost his pack. Now he's found another. On the recommendation of Larson, Zach also sent footage to Dr. Emily Strauss, a canine behaviorist based in Boulder. They had never met in person, but Strauss had worked with ex-military dogs in trauma recovery and had a reputation for combining science with heart. Her reply came swiftly. This dog is exhibiting high bonding behavior with your wife, specifically in relation to the pregnancy. His body language suggests both protection and empathy, particularly remarkable in a dog with a service background. You may be seeing a transference of maternal energy. He may be reading the hormonal changes, or even the baby's micro-movements. Some dogs do, most don't. This is rare. Zach shared the message with Olivia over breakfast. She was stirring honey into her tea, and when she read it, her hands stilled. Do you think, she began slowly, he knows what happened before? Zach didn't answer right away. He looked at her, her pale skin touched pink by the winter air, her eyes clearer than they had been in months. She was healing, not just physically, not just hormonally. She was laughing again, sleeping again. He knows what's happening now, Zach said finally. That's what matters. The next few weeks passed in a soft rhythm. Bruno grew more agile with each passing day. His limp faded into a faint hitch. Olivia's belly grew heavier, her steps slower. But every movement she made, Bruno echoed not as a shadow, but as a mirror. They began to call it the dance. A silent choreography between a woman and a dog who shared no language, yet understood everything. One afternoon, Zach returned home to find Olivia asleep in the sunroom, a quilt covering her legs. Bruno sat near her feet, unmoving, not dozing, guarding, watching. His ears flicked once when Zach entered, but he didn't shift. Zach sat beside him, knees cracking as he bent. You're not just watching her, he murmured. You're watching me too. Bruno didn't blink, didn't wag his tail. I get it, Zach added. You don't trust me yet. I'm still figuring it out too. And maybe that was the truth. Maybe Bruno, in his silence, in his stillness, was holding Zach accountable, not just to protect, but to feel, not just to provide, but to believe again. That night, for the first time in years, Zach slept through the night without dreaming of gunfire. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, not all at once, but slowly. And that was enough. The snow returned without warning, sweeping in from the northwest like a silent army cloaked in white. By late afternoon, the mountains around Cedarville had disappeared behind a wall of drifting flurries. The Dawson cabin, usually serene and still, pulsed with quiet tension. Olivia stood in the hallway, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other gripping the doorframe. Her breath was short, her eyes wide but calm. Zach, she said, her voice thin, I think it's time. Zach had already been on edge all week. At the slightest grunt or shift from Olivia, his boots were on, keys in hand. Now, without needing to speak, he moved into action. The hospital bag sat ready by the door, packed days earlier with careful hands and quiet hope. He scooped it up and placed an arm around Olivia as she shuffled toward the truck. Her steps were slow, uneven. The contractions had begun earlier that day, soft tremors at first, then building with the rhythm of a storm. Bruno stood at the threshold, watching everything unfold. His ears were alert, his body still. He didn't bark or pace. He just watched. When Zach opened the door, Bruno moved forward instinctively, as if to follow, but Zach paused and knelt beside him. "Stay, buddy," he said, placing a firm hand on Bruno's neck. "Watch the house. Watch over her space." Bruno didn't move, didn't whine. But as the truck rolled down the snowy path, he walked slowly to the door and lay down, nose to wood, ears pricked. He would not move again for hours. At Cedarville General Hospital, Olivia was admitted quickly. The staff there knew her. She had come in twice before, but left both times with empty arms. This time, though, felt different. There was a silent understanding among the nurses, passed through glances and gentle smiles. One of them, a petite woman named Teresa, stayed by Olivia's side the entire time. In her early 50s, with curly gray-streaked hair and a kind voice lined by years of experience, Teresa was the kind of nurse who whispered encouragement without trying too hard. She had delivered over 300 babies in her career, but she always kept a bracelet of wooden beads around her wrist, a gift from the first mother she ever helped. "For luck," she said. "For prayers I don't speak out loud." Back at the cabin, the snow continued to fall. Bruno remained planted by the front door. He refused food, refused water. When Tommy stopped by to check in, he found the dog unmoving, eyes focused like a soldier waiting for a signal. "Damn," Tommy muttered, crouching down. "You know something, don't you?" Bruno flicked his ears, but did not respond. At the hospital, the hours dragged into night. Olivia fought through the pain, her body trembling, but her spirit steady. Zach never left her side, clutching her hand until his knuckles turned white. The storm outside was so intense that even the nurses commented on it. Roads were being closed, phone lines were unreliable, and no new admissions were being accepted. It was as if the world itself had paused to wait with them. Noah Dawson was born just past midnight. He came quietly. No dramatic wail, no loud cry, just a single breath, soft and sure, as if he'd simply stepped from one world into another. The nurses whispered congratulations. Zach's heart, usually guarded like a fortress, cracked open like warm bread. Olivia, soaked in sweat and tears, laughed weakly. "He's here," she said. "He's really here." 2 days later, after the roads cleared and Olivia was discharged, they returned home. The snow had melted in patches, leaving slush and puddles near the cabin steps. As Zach pulled into the driveway, Bruno was already on his feet. He had not moved far since they had left. His coat was dusted with snow, but his posture was firm, ears up, tail still. As Olivia stepped out, carrying the baby wrapped in a thick blue blanket, Bruno did not rush. He waited. She paused at the top of the steps, snow crunching beneath her boots. "He remembers," she whispered. Zach opened the door. Bruno walked forward slowly, every movement measured. When he reached Olivia and the baby, he lowered his body to the ground, first his chest, then his elbows, then his chin resting gently in the snow. His ears pinned back slightly. His tail did not wag. He made a single, low vocalization, a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a hum. Noah stirred in Olivia's arms. He had been fussing gently during the drive, small whimpers like tiny waves. But now he stilled. His eyes, unfocused but bright, blinked. Then his hand, no bigger than a curled leaf, escaped the blanket and reached outward, fingers splayed, searching. The hand brushed against Bruno's fur. The baby didn't cry. Olivia knelt slowly, bringing Noah closer to eye level. Bruno did not move. His body was still pressed flat to the earth, his eyes locked on the infant's face. Noah made a soft cooing sound, then closed his eyes, content. From that moment, the household rhythm changed. Bruno no longer followed Olivia. He followed Noah. He stationed himself beside the bassinet, curled himself into tight circles on the nursery rug, and moved silently whenever the baby shifted. At feeding times, he sat nearby, his head tilted, as if learning the process. At night, when Zack paced the hallway with a fussing Noah, Bruno padded alongside him, step for step. Olivia watched from the doorway once, tears prickling her eyes. "They're in sync," she whispered, and they were. Bruno anticipated Noah's moods with uncanny precision. He would rise before the baby cried, pacing just seconds before the monitor lit up. He learned to ignore the sounds of adult conversation, but perked up at every sigh, hiccup, or coo from the newborn. Tommy, stopping by with a crate of firewood, observed the scene with a slow smile. "That dog ain't just watching," he said. "He's claiming." Zack nodded. "I know." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees, casting gold over the melting snow, Zack stood at the porch, watching the two forms inside the living room. Bruno lay beside the baby's rocker. Noah, wide-eyed and alert, was watching him back. Zack reached for Olivia's hand. "I think," he said slowly, "this is what trust looks like." Spring arrived not with a shout, but a whisper dripping snow from the eaves, the soft creak of thawing soil, and the scent of pine sap riding the breeze. The Dawson cabin seemed to exhale, shedding its winter hush for something lighter. Inside, life moved in gentle rhythms, feedings, naps, small cries, and warm laughter. But the truest sound, the one that seemed to pull everything into harmony, was not made by voice or bark. It came from Bruno, and the way he simply existed beside Noah. At nearly 4 months old, Noah had begun rolling to his side, then to his belly, experimenting with the strange mechanics of his own body. Every attempt was met with grunts of frustration and moments of wonder. Bruno would watch from a careful distance, never too close, never too far. When Noah rolled unevenly, Bruno would shift his body just slightly, presenting a soft surface to lean on. When Noah giggled, Bruno's ears twitched and his eyes softened, as if he too found joy in the boy's discovery. Olivia often watched the two from the kitchen, her arms crossed gently over her chest. She had never believed in things like spirit animals or unspoken bonds. Not really. But there was something about the way Bruno adapted to Noah's every movement, as though the dog had stepped into the role of guardian, teacher, and sibling all in one. One afternoon, she called her sister Sarah to describe it. Sarah, a pediatric nurse in Portland, was 5 years older than Olivia. Tall, with a wiry frame, sharp hazel eyes, and a voice always half-laced with sarcasm, she had seen enough hospital walls to know the fragility of life. She was practical to the bone, but fiercely protective of her family. On the phone, Olivia tried to explain how Bruno placed himself between Noah and the sharp edge of the coffee table when the baby first pushed himself up, how he turned his body to block the staircase, how he nudged a dropped rattle back toward Noah's hands. "So you're saying the dog is teaching him?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "I'm saying the dog is patient," Olivia replied. "More patient than most adults I know." Sarah paused, then chuckled. "Well, if he starts reading bedtime stories, call me back." Later that week, something happened that would stay etched in Zack's mind. He had just come in from chopping firewood, sweat clinging to the back of his neck despite the cool mountain air. He paused by the window, wiping his hands on a towel. There, on the living room rug, Noah lay on his belly, arms flailing with delight. Bruno lay beside him, mirroring the pose, head resting on crossed paws. Slowly, deliberately, the dog rolled onto his back, then onto his side again. Noah watched, eyes wide. Then, with visible effort, he rolled himself again. Zack leaned against the doorway, breath caught. He waited. Bruno rolled once more, and Noah, like a tiny mimic, followed. By the 4th try, Noah let out a delighted squeal. Zack's throat tightened. He had read parenting books, watched videos, even asked Tommy about raising kids back in his day. But none of it had prepared him for the raw, wordless power of that moment. His son had just been taught by a creature who had never spoken a word. That night, he sat beside Olivia on the porch swing, watching the last of the sun flicker through the trees. Bruno lay near the steps, ears twitching in his sleep. "He taught him," Zack said. "Taught what?" Olivia asked, eyes half closed. "To roll over." She smiled faintly. "We're all learning from someone, aren't we?" Bruno's roll deepened over the following weeks. When Noah started pushing up on his arms, Bruno adjusted his distance, giving space without abandoning his watch. When Noah babbled nonsense, Bruno tilted his head and listened like it was the most important speech in the world. Olivia began calling Bruno the Old Man, a nickname both affectionate and true. There was something ancient in the dog's stillness, not tired, never tired, but measured, introspective. Even during tense moments, Bruno never flinched. When Noah grabbed too roughly clutching a tuft of fur or tugging an ear, Bruno would rise, walk a few steps away, then circle back as if to say, "Try again, gentler this time." Zach found himself watching those interactions with growing humility. There had always been a tightness in his chest when he thought about fatherhood, some mixture of fear and inadequacy. He had faced war zones, firestorms, flash floods, but holding a newborn felt more daunting than any battlefield. Now, watching Bruno, watching how the dog let himself be vulnerable, how he offered strength without dominance, Zach began to understand something deeper. Patience isn't weakness, Tommy had told him once over a beer. It's knowing when to stay. That's the hardest damn thing. Bruno had mastered it. One afternoon, while Zach rocked Noah to sleep, the boy reached out in his dreams, hand brushing against Bruno's fur. Zach stilled, listening to the rhythm of breathing, his son's, his dog's, and his own. The three of them. Different species, different scars, bound by silence and trust. Olivia came in quietly, wrapped in her favorite cardigan. She leaned against the doorway and watched them. "You're both doing great," she whispered. Zach chuckled under his breath. "I'm just trying to keep up." Bruno opened one eye, as if to say, "Same here." The wind came first. It crept in from the west, dry, restless, carrying with it the brittle scent of pine needles too long untouched by rain. It danced across the tops of trees and whispered warnings no one heard in time. By mid-morning, the sky had taken on a yellowish hue, and birds flew lower than usual, their silhouettes quick and uneasy against the backdrop of the ridge. Zach was in town when the call came through. The voice on the other end was Deputy Miller, a lean, tight-lipped man in his late 40s with a scar running along his left temple, a souvenir from an ATV rollover years back. Known for his no-nonsense tone and coffee addiction, Miller rarely called unless it mattered. "Fire near Bramble Creek," he said without preamble. "Looks small now, but the wind's wrong. We're short-staffed. You in?" Zach didn't hesitate. "Send me the coordinates." He was already reaching for his gear before the call ended. His uniform was worn, but reliable thick canvas pants, steel-toed boots, a bright yellow jacket with reflective stripes faded from sun and ash. He grabbed his helmet from the back of the truck and threw it in. As he opened the door, he caught Bruno's gaze from inside the cabin. "You stay with them," Zach said simply. Bruno didn't move, but something in his golden eyes seemed to tighten, as if he sensed more than Zach could say. At home, Olivia had been folding Noah's freshly laundered onesies when the wind shifted and brought the scent of smoke to her nose. It was faint at first, almost like burnt toast, then stronger, sharper. She walked out onto the porch and saw the thin gray ribbon rising over the trees to the east. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a community alert. Controlled burn suspected of spreading. Evacuation recommended for Southern Ridge homes. Monitor updates. She didn't panic. Not at first. But she knew the way fire moved in this part of Colorado. Fast, hungry, unforgiving. She bundled Noah in his thickest blanket, tucked him into the baby carrier, and grabbed the emergency bag Zach had packed weeks ago, just in case. Formula, diapers, 2 water bottles, and a flashlight. She left a note on the counter for Zach, in case they missed each other. Bruno was already standing at the front door. "Come on," she said, voice calm but urgent. "Let's go." They followed the old trail behind the cabin, the one that led toward Tommy's property a mile down. Olivia hadn't taken it alone before, especially not with the baby, but she trusted Bruno. The dog moved ahead, tail stiff, ears high, nose twitching with every step. The smoke thickened quickly. Within 20 minutes, visibility dropped. The air burned her throat, and Noah began to fuss in the carrier, his small cries muffled against her chest. Olivia's heart pounded. Not just from the hike, but from the gnawing sense that the fire was moving faster than she was. They were almost halfway when her foot caught on a hidden root, slick with ash and dew. She fell hard. Pain shot through her ankle. She gasped, crumpling to her side. The baby let out a sharp wail. "I'm okay," she whispered, trying to stand, but the ankle gave way. Panic surged for the first time. She looked around, disoriented. The trail had blurred. The smoke curled low like a curtain, and the wind carried the dry crackle of burning leaves. Bruno was already moving. He sniffed her once urgent, quick, and then darted back the way they'd come, vanishing into the haze. "Bruno!" she called after him. "No, wait!" But he was gone. Olivia wrapped her arms tightly around Noah, whispering to soothe them both. The baby had quieted, perhaps sensing her fear. She pressed her back against a tree trunk, blinking against the smoke, trying to think. It wasn't long. 10 minutes, 15 at most, before she heard it. Voices, men, footsteps. Then Bruno's bark, short, sharp, leading. A rescue volunteer emerged first, tall, wiry, with a flannel wrapped around his mouth. Behind him, 2 more appeared. One of them was Deputy Miller himself. Bruno ran ahead, turned, barked again, then looked straight at Olivia as if to say, "You see, I brought them. Ma'am, are you injured?" the younger rescuer asked, crouching beside her. "Ankle," she said. "I tripped. The baby's fine." They worked fast. One man lifted Noah, another supported Olivia as she limped forward. Bruno walked beside them, refusing to fall behind, though his movements were slower now. It wasn't until they reached the clearing that Olivia noticed the limp. A dark patch marked the fur on Bruno's front right leg, just above the paw. Burned. He didn't whine, didn't falter, but his breathing was shallow. By the time they made it to safety, an old fire road now serving as an evacuation checkpoint, Zach had already arrived, covered in soot, his helmet in one hand. He saw Olivia first, then Noah, then Bruno. He rushed to them, touching Olivia's shoulders, kissing his son's forehead, then crouching to face Bruno. He noticed the wound instantly. "You stayed with them?" Zach asked softly. Bruno licked the soot off Zach's glove and sat down, his chest heaving. Zach's jaw clenched. A vet on site checked Bruno quickly, a woman named Dr. Jennings, called in from a wildlife center nearby. She was small-framed, dark-skinned, her hair tied tightly back, moving with efficiency and care. "Second-degree burn," she said, wrapping the paw. "He's lucky. Any deeper and he'd have lost the pad." Bruno didn't flinch. Later that evening, they were relocated to a community shelter in the high school gymnasium. Cots lined the walls, families clutched bags and pets in blankets. Olivia lay beside Noah in the far corner, her foot elevated. Zach brought her soup from the volunteer table, then sat beside Bruno's blanket on the floor. The dog refused to sleep away from Noah's crib, so they let him stay there, just close enough to watch. And all night, even with his injury, even with the exhaustion of fire still clinging to his fur, Bruno kept his eyes half open, ears flicking at every sound. Zach sat beside him and whispered, "You're more than a dog." Bruno didn't answer. He didn't have to. By the time the leaves turned amber and gold along the edges of Cedarville's roads, the fire had long been put out, but its echoes remained quiet reminders stitched into the land and the people who lived close to it. In the weeks that followed the rescue, word spread. First through neighbors, then through community bulletin boards, then farther into schools, town meetings, and eventually into the quiet halls of the Cedarville Community Library, where stories were given space to breathe. It was Mrs. Helen Ashcroft, the library director, who first reached out to Olivia. In her mid-60s, Helen had the graceful sternness of someone who had raised 3 sons and 2 Labradors, and had mastered the art of commanding silence with just a look over her reading glasses. She had been in Cedarville longer than most, and wore her silver hair in a tight bun, her long cardigans always filled with tissues and hard peppermint candies. She had read the short article in the local paper, a piece written by Deputy Miller's niece, who freelanced as a reporter. The article had been straightforward, but the story behind it was not. A dog, formerly injured and nearly discarded, had not only saved a woman and child, but had chosen on his own to seek help. That part had caught Helen's attention. Dogs barked, dogs waited, but dogs didn't lead people through smoke and fire, not without something deeper. She called Olivia on a rainy Tuesday morning. Her voice, though formal, held warmth. "Mrs. Dawson, I believe our town could use a story like yours, told by you. Would you be willing to speak at our children's safety program next month? Perhaps share how Bruno helped?" Olivia hesitated. She wasn't a public speaker. Her voice trembled when she read in church, and even PTA meetings made her palms sweat. But something in the quiet way Helen asked made her consider it. Maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about the story. "I'll do it," she said, "but only if Bruno can come too." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of hosting it without him." The announcement went out within days. Bruno the Hero, a family story of courage, fire, and friendship, accompanied by a photo of Bruno, now fully recovered, sitting beside Noah in the backyard. The image had been taken by Zach one morning, just after dawn. Bruno's coat was rich and dark, his eyes alert, while Noah, now nearly too rested, one small hand on his back, both of them staring off toward the misty trees. When the day arrived, the library was more full than usual. Parents held toddlers on their laps. Elementary students leaned forward in their seats, fidgeting with shoelaces and snack wrappers. There were firefighters in the back row. A reporter from the regional news station stood off to the side with a handheld camera. Olivia wore a pale blue dress and a knitted shawl. She looked calm, but held her notes with both hands, knuckles pale. Noah sat in the front row with Zach beside him. The boy's curly brown hair fell in front of his eyes, and he squirmed excitedly in his seat. And Bruno. He sat at Olivia's feet, still and composed, wearing a red bandana that read, "Community Hero." Olivia began softly. "It started in the snow, a dog we didn't expect, a baby we had long prayed for, and a fire none of us saw coming." Her voice found rhythm in the memories. She told them about the night they found Bruno, about the way he placed his head on her belly before Noah was even born. She spoke of his silent companionship, his instinct, the way he didn't bark or beg, but listened, followed, protected. She told them about the fire, about the fall, about how Bruno ran on a burned paw and led strangers through smoke to save them. When she paused, Bruno stood. As if on cue, Noah called out, "Brew, brew!" The audience laughed, but there was tenderness in it. After the event, children lined up to pet Bruno. Some were shy, others threw their arms around his neck. He endured it all with the quiet patience he was known for. One little boy named Elijah, who had been scared of dogs his whole life, approached slowly, guided by his mother, a tall woman with nervous eyes and a soothing voice. Elijah reached out. Bruno leaned in. Helen approached Zach as the crowd dispersed. She looked at him over her glasses. "He's changed a lot of people already," she said. Zach nodded. "He changed me first." Helen's brow lifted slightly. "How so?" He looked over at Olivia, who was crouching beside Bruno, and Noah, then back at Helen. "I used to think fatherhood was something you had to prepare for, something to earn. But Bruno didn't wait. He just showed up, chose love first. No training, no guarantees." Helen smiled. "That's the bravest kind." Zach didn't speak again, but later, as they packed up and loaded Noah into the back seat, he reached down and stroked the top of Bruno's head. "You made me better," he whispered. "You taught me how to stay." The morning sun spilled across the meadows like melted gold, warm and forgiving, stretching long fingers across the hills of Cedarville. The air had a softness to it, no longer crisp with the bite of early spring, but mellow with the slow approach of summer. Outside the Dawson cabin, everything felt familiar and quietly alive. Birdsong, wind brushing through the tall grass, and the sound of small feet pattering on the wooden porch. Noah had just turned 3. He ran barefoot through the yard, his tiny legs unsteady but determined. His mop of brown curls bounced with each step, and his laugh a high, bright burst rose into the air, like a song that never tired. He held a stick in one hand, some sort of magic wand, and wore a paper crown made by his mother, slightly askew on his head. Bruno walked behind him, slow and steady. The once mighty German shepherd, now older, had begun to gray around his muzzle. His gait had softened into something deliberate, his strong legs a little more careful with each step. But he never lagged too far behind Noah. Even as time chipped away at his strength, his loyalty never dimmed. Olivia stood by the porch steps, a camera slung over her shoulder. She wore a simple linen dress the color of seafoam, her auburn hair braided loosely down her back. Watching the two move together, her son and the dog, who had once saved them both, brought tears to her eyes, though she smiled through them. Behind her, the birthday decorations rustled gently in the breeze, strings of paper lanterns, a small handmade banner that read, "Noah is 3, and a picnic table covered in checkered cloth, stacked with mason jars of lemonade and plates of blueberry muffins. There would be a gathering later, just a few neighbors and friends, including Tommy from next door and Helen Ashcroft from the library. But this part, this quiet morning before the noise, belonged only to them. Zach emerged from the shed carrying a small wrapped box. He was dressed in worn jeans and a navy shirt rolled up at the sleeves, his beard trimmed short, and the lines around his eyes deeper now, but no less kind. He walked toward Olivia, kissed her cheek, then followed her gaze toward the yard. "He still won't go anywhere without him," Olivia said softly. Zach chuckled. "I'm not sure who's following who anymore." Bruno stopped at the base of a tree and sat down, watching Noah with calm eyes. The boy turned to him and, with an instinct that had long since become habit, reached out his hand to rest it on Bruno's back. His fingers splayed against the dog's fur like he was touching something sacred, a totem of comfort and memory. Zach stepped forward. "Ready for his gift?" Noah turned, face lighting up. "Is it a truck? Is it blue?" "Even better," Zach said, crouching to his level. He opened the box and lifted out a soft, hand-sewn plush dog, a stuffed Bruno, down to the brown patch on the ear and the small stitch scar on the left leg. Noah gasped, then hugged it close. "His name is Little Brew Brew," he declared immediately. Bruno wagged his tail once, approving. Later that afternoon, guests began to arrive. Tommy Hale came carrying a wooden birdhouse he had carved and painted himself. His old flannel shirt was buttoned to the top, his beard braided at the end like always. "For the boy who talks to birds," he said, handing the gift to Noah, who nodded seriously and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Tommy." Helen brought 3 board books about brave animals and kind hearts, and gave Bruno a chew toy shaped like a fire hydrant. "Symbolic," she said with a wink. Bruno took it graciously, placing it beside his spot on the porch without chewing it once. During the party, Noah danced in circles, holding Little Brew Brew in one hand and a sparkler in the other. Bruno lay in a sunlit patch near the porch, his hero bandana tied neatly around his neck. Olivia had sewn it fresh that morning, a soft red with golden embroidery. It read simply, "Still watching." As the light faded and dust spilled its lavender hues across the sky, Olivia called everyone to gather near the steps. Zach set up the tripod, balancing the camera with practiced hands. Noah sat on Olivia's lap, Little Brew Brew tucked against his chest. Bruno moved slowly but with dignity, positioning himself in front of them, facing outward, eyes half-lidded but alert. Zach joined them and set the timer. The shutter clicked. In that captured moment, there was no war, no fire, no loss, only the stillness of a family at peace. A man with quiet strength, a woman with gentle courage, a boy with an open heart, and a dog who had given them all a second beginning. Later that night, after the guests had left and Noah had fallen asleep hugging his stuffed dog, Zach and Olivia sat on the porch beneath the stars. "You think he knows?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above the wind. Zach looked at Bruno, who lay near Noah's bedroom window, one ear flicking at the crickets. "He always knew," he replied. They sat in silence for a while. Then Zach added, almost to himself, "Family isn't just blood, it's who stays, who shows up when it matters, and who never walks away." Bruno didn't move, but from behind the window, a tiny hand reached out and tapped the glass, just once. Bruno's tail thumped gently against the wood, and the world, for that night at least, was whole. Not all miracles come wrapped in light from the heavens. Some arrive in fur and quiet footsteps, in loyalty that never wavers, in love that asks for nothing in return. Bruno didn't just save a child. He healed a father's fear, a mother's grief, and reminded us all that sometimes God answers our prayers not with thunder, but with presence, with staying, with grace in the shape of a dog. Maybe that's what faith really looks like in everyday life. Not something loud, but something faithful, something that shows up again and again when we need it most. If this story stirred something in your heart, we invite you to pause for a moment. Share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you feel it in your spirit, type "Amen" below as a quiet prayer for all those still waiting for their own small miracle. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. And may God's gentle hand be upon you always.